Hi, yeah, I've just got a bit of a Christmassy background. This is sort of just a preamble to the main video, but I just thought, um, I don't know, I'm kind of talking about joy at Christmas time in the video, and I didn't want it, but I recognise that at Christmas it can be actually a very difficult time for a lot of people, and that Christmas with all the kind of like lights and glitteriness, actually, it feels like a really cheap facade put over actually really deep problems of pain or difficulty. And it's not just COVID-y sort of stuff, like people are going through lots of difficult times. And I remember in the past myself, I used to just hate Christmas time because it seemed so cheap and fake. Um, but that's kind of why I think actually that the message of joy, that's really, really rooted in what is true, and a hope that is true and secure, a firm foundation, that is all the more meaningful, precisely because it's not like all this fakeness. It's not like all these lights and glitter and like airy fairy stuff. It's really, really real. And so I just wanted to kind of add that in advance to what I say in the main body of the video, so that you don't think I'm kind of, you know, just dressing lightly over a much bigger issue. Like to feel joy is a very difficult thing for a lot of people. So I just wanted to kind of caveat that. But yeah, God bless. Hope you enjoy the main video.
Hey YouTube, I just wanted to share a little thought that I had kind of recently, and it's quite topical anyway because it's kind of coming around Christmas time, and it might be pretty obvious to lots of people, but I don't know, I think a lot of us can get really lose sight, I guess, of the significance of Christmas because of over familiarity with what is kind of taking place. And I guess we just basically don't really grapple with how important it is and how wonderful it is. And I was just struck recently, I was at a carol service, and I was just struck recently listening to one of the hymns, just remembering how kind of the magnitude of Christmas. And so I thought I'd share this kind of perspective that I had on it. And maybe you've kind of already realized this. I didn't really think about it through. But yeah, either ways. So I was just thinking, like, you get the people in the Old Testament, and especially those who are coming near the end of the Old Testament, and they are having to wait upon God, and they're having to trust in his promises. And they have a lot of the scriptures which they can then look back on and read, and they can read about God's goodness and faithfulness. And they have all these events in their Israel's history, basically, of how God has been faithful and good to them. And they can draw so much joy from that. But especially kind of approaching up to Jesus's birth and arrival. So the 400 years almost between the Old Testament and New Testament, from Malachi to Matthew, there's basically like prophetic silence. And I'm just trying to think how difficult that must have been. How God's people are not hearing as much as they used to from him, at least. And it's like, it must be so difficult for them. And what are they having to do? They're having, in the middle of those really dark, difficult times, again, eventually they come under Roman oppression and persecution and so on like that. So these are really dark, difficult times, and yet they don't see, or they don't have all this kind of insight and wisdom and prophecy from God. And so what are they having to do? They're having to just latch onto the good, true promises that they can read in the past, that they can read in the scriptures, and they're having to base their hope and joy in that. And that's so difficult, but so rich. And so I was thinking about how difficult that must have been. And then, I guess, in light of how difficult that must have been, I then kind of was just so struck by how insanely joyful it must have actually been for those who saw Jesus when he came 2,000 years ago, when he actually came, when the Messiah, the one who was prophesied throughout the scriptures, the one who was going to be the Prince of Peace, who would deliver Israel and would deliver his people, who would bring them out of darkness, who would be a light to all people. Imagine being someone who again, like you've been with your people, you've been waiting for almost 400 years, hearing basically nothing, and then you get to see the fulfillment of all of that. You get to see the person with your own eyes. And I think there are three kind of big, obvious examples of that. And I'm not going to read all of them, but they're all in Luke's Gospel. So you've got Mary's song, or Mary's Magnificat, which is in chapter 1, verses 46 to 55, basically. And then you've got Zechariah's song in chapter 1, verses 67 to around about 79. And then you've got Simeon's song, which is around, I think it's chapter 2, verses 29 to 32, basically. And I'll just read a couple of bits. So from Mary's song, she says, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour." And then in verse 50, "His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm." And then you come to Zechariah's song, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come and redeemed his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear." And then Simeon's song in chapter 2, there's a bit in verse 30, it says, "For my eyes have seen your," because he's holding Jesus, right? "For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel." And I guess this might be obvious to a lot of you guys. I didn't really latch onto it, but just tangibly getting a sense of the depth of the joy that these people must have felt at seeing Jesus, at seeing the Messiah, the fulfillment of all these promises, who's finally come after all this time waiting. And I basically think that that's such a powerful picture for how the Christian life works, how God graces us with working and like powerfully and intervening in our lives and working amazing things and salvation, right? And then probably down the line, we have these times where God seems a lot more distant. Now, God obviously isn't actually distant, but he seems much more distant, and we feel things can kind of stagnate and things can become more difficult and tiresome. And in those times, what do? We can look back then on our past kind of experience in God's faithfulness and goodness to what he's done for us. And we also, again, like these people, like Mary, like Zechariah, like Simeon, like all the other Israelites, God's people, what do? They have the scriptures. They'd go to the scriptures and read and trust in God's promises. They would latch onto God's promises. And so they would be able to look to the past and then let that inform their view of the present and their view of the future, their hope in the fulfillment of those promises. And that's the same for us. That's the same for us as Christians. We read the scriptures and we hope in the future. We hope in the future fulfillment of the promises and when Jesus will return. And when there'll be a new heavens and a new earth, and there'll be no more tears and no more pain and no more suffering, and God will dwell with his people and he will be their God. And that's just incredible. And then also, think about this. Israelites had to wait 400 years. It must have seemed hopeless. Again, it seems like God's promises aren't going to come true. But then we clearly see they absolutely came true in an unimaginably beautiful and profound sense. Like a lot of the Jews didn't realize the gravity of what it would mean for Jesus coming, like the Son of God in human flesh. And then I think that's such a huge encouragement for Christians who are waiting on the Lord and hoping in him, because you know surely that his promises will both come true, and they will come true on a level far more beautiful, wonderful, great, and just glorious than you could ever comprehend. So I just wanted to leave you guys with that encouragement, especially if Christmas time can just seem a bit over familiar or ubiquitous to you, like it just seems a bit boring. I just really pray that maybe that insight would, again, get you to latch onto the extent of the joy and the kind of gravity of what Christmas means when Jesus comes to save his people, and how people were waiting for that. And that was the fulfillment of their hope. And I just pray for myself especially, and for others, that we could, coming into Christmas time now, just have so much joy and peace looking at what Christmas really means. That we would actually be praising God, just full of ebullience and joy at the fact that he has come, and the fact that he has made his way for us to be saved. And I pray that that's something we could boldly share with other people, because it is so cool. I wish all of you guys a very merry Christmas, and a blessed new year. God bless, guys.